So it's a truism that the United States is a suburban nation. Over 50% of Americans live in the suburbs today, and a much larger proportion of Americans live in places that are characterized by a suburban landscape, a landscape of single-family houses, yards of their own, set back from their neighbors, surrounded by greenery, a sense of private nature, a refuge from the city. It's a neighborhood, or it's a landscape that is ubiquitous in the United States, and it's easy to overlook. It certainly isn't the kind of place that you imagine to be the source of international outrage, national condemnation, self-righteous stories in Life magazine. But this is a neighborhood where all of those things took place. This is Southwood in South San Francisco. And this is the neighborhood where in 1952, a Chinese-American couple, Grace and Sing Sheng, tried to buy a house. They put down a deposit, $2,900 on one of these houses. And in the process, Sing Sheng was visited by 5 men from the neighborhood, 5 white men from the neighborhood, who told him that he and his wife and small child were not welcome. Sheng tried to negotiate with the men and convince them that he should be allowed to live here, which was already his right as an American. But they disagreed, and so they struck a deal. Sheng said that in a democratic country like the United States, in the midst of the Korean War, a war for democracy against communism, that they should take a vote. And so a vote was held here on this street, and the Shengs were outvoted. The neighbors voted 174 to 28 that they shouldn't be allowed to move in. And so the Shengs' dream stopped here. They decided to abide by the outcome of the vote. Charlotte Brooks tells that story very well, and so we have the details of it, but there's other interesting features to think about in the context as well. Suburbia is not just a landscape of the physical world or geography, but also it's a landscape of the mind. And like all landscapes, it is produced in its particular moment and encapsulates ideas, values of a society in a given moment in time. And that's especially true of a place like this, and especially true of post-World War II American suburbia. Suburbia at that time encapsulated ideas in American life about social class and upper mobility, about family, about community, about relations with nature and relations with neighbors, about inclusion and exclusion, ideas about race and belonging. And so the story of the exclusion of the Sheng family here in the Southwood neighborhood is a story that encapsulates all of those features. White Americans by the millions were able, after World War II, to move to landscapes such as these, which were built by and for them. But they argued that those neighborhoods could not be integrated and that those neighborhoods could not be shared with people of color. They believed that if African Americans or Asian Americans or Latinos moved into those neighborhoods, that somehow property values would go down, that neighborliness would be broken up, that their capacity for social mobility and wealth building would be impeded. And they fought to keep these landscapes racially homogeneous and segregated. It was the great sin in mid-20th century America, the snake in the garden of American suburbia, which provided for a step up for tens of millions of American families into the middle class and into a home that was their own, which for many of those millions became the basis for the building of wealth and upper mobility in society. One critical element of this story and implication for the future, of course, is that if your family was able to purchase a house in the post-World War II period and able to own that home full time, pay it off, and then family was able to build wealth and able to pass that wealth along to give the next generation a head start in society. But if your family was excluded from the possibility of moving into such a community or purchasing a house and seeing it appreciate in value, then the possibility for building wealth in that generation and then sharing that wealth with the next generation was also cut off. And so the story of exclusion in post-World War II suburbia is a story that very much has implications for our society today and the inequities of wealth that continue to be built into American society in the 21st century. They were built here 75 years ago in the middle of the 20th century. There's one final coda to the story of Southwood and South San Francisco. Today, South San Francisco is one of the most diverse suburbs in the United States. About 80% of the people who live here are people of color. 40% of the population is Asian American, Chinese American, Filipino American. About a third are Latino, and about 20% are white or Anglo. And these houses sell for about $1 million a pop. It is San Francisco after all. But that illustrates that the ideology of falling property values and the incapacity of integrated neighborhoods to function was a lie. Today, the problem in communities like Southwood is cost and the opportunity for people to buy in. But for people who are here, of course, these houses continue to function as vehicles for building wealth, for building family, for building community. They continue to function the way they were designed in suburbia of the 1940s and 50s. And for me, they offer an opportunity or a possibility that suburbia today can build a better future than the suburbia of the past. And in any event, that's my hope. But here we are at South San Francisco, Southwood community.